Welcome to episode 30 of Talking Prisoner. Today we have another special guest with us. She only appeared in 2 episodes of Prisoner, but however had a massive impact on the show. She is also a NIDA graduate with a Bachelor of Dramatic Art in Acting and a Master of Fine Arts in Writing and Directing. She's had a successful stage career alongside television and film, and is also a voiceover artist, narrator, and a playwright. She has also appeared in Special Squad, Rafferty's Rules, Mother and Son, Cop Shop, Carson's Law, The Flying Doctors, Mortified, Reef Doctors, Harrow and Fires. We are, of course, talking about the amazing Sally McKenzie, who played Blackmoor top dog Roo Morgan. Welcome to Talking Prisoner, and welcome, Ken.
Hello, welcome. Hello, lovely to talk. Hi, Matt. Hi, Ken.
Thanks for joining us.
Hi, everyone.
It's great to have you here. Now, before we get into the prisoner stuff, can we talk about your life growing up and where you grew up as a child?
Oh, yes, certainly. Actually, I was born in Sydney, but I grew up in South Australia. We moved there when I was, in my 4 or 5. So I grew up in Adelaide, which was great. Had a very, I suppose you say, independent type of childhood, in as much that we had a dairy farm. We didn't live on it, but I went up there on regularly on weekends and was able to develop my imagination amongst the cows and the pastures and the cow pads and etc. And but we lived in the suburb of Adelaide near the water. And I started acting from a very early age. Told my mum supposedly that she recalls when I was about 5 that I was going to be an actor. I must have seen something. My mother was a very kind of cultured woman and took us to see things, live theatre, etc., and musicals. And I did. So I began acting classes. I was in the inaugural acting class of what is now called the Patch Theatre, which is still going. It's since gone on to be a professional theatre company in terms that they develop works and produce works for young people through funding. But when I was there, it was just run by a woman called Morna Jones, and started when I was about 11. So
amazing.
Or school memories. Did you have favourite subjects or unfavourite subjects?
Well, one of my unfavourite subjects wasn't on the curriculum, Ken. It was I was teased mercifully because of my hair. It might be de rigueur and fashionable to have red hair that is thick now and curly, but back in the day, we're talking the 60s, it wasn't. You wanted to just blend in with the rest of the children in the class, in the classroom and in the quadrangle. But so I think it's like 4% of the population in the world have red hair, and I'm originally a redhead. And it was big, it was huge, stuck out like this. And there was a clown on TV called Bobo, which might sound funny now, but at the time when you wanted to just blend in with everybody else. So I don't think I actually concentrated a great deal on my subjects. However, if I were to nominate them, they would be what you would think art and English stuck out, and poetry, etc. Yeah.
Fantastic. It's funny you say that about the red hair. There was an actress on A Country Practice back in the
Di.
There was calls for her to be off TV because of her red hair. It was absolutely
That's disgusting, isn't it?
I couldn't believe it.
Well, see, now we celebrate difference, but nobody was celebrating difference in the 60s and 70s. In fact, when I came out of acting school, NIDA, some of my colleagues were asked to change their name from their sort of ethnic sounding name. So how the world has changed, thankfully.
Yes. Yeah, thankfully. What did your parents do for work when you were younger?
Well, my father was a dairy farmer. It wasn't designed to be that way. He actually was a graduate of the Sydney University in a Bachelor of Agricultural Science. And my mother, being of the generation she was actually a director of kindergartens there for a while during the war effort, World War II. But once started having children, she was a housekeeper. as a lot of women were that generation that got back into the house situation once the war effort had finished. So did spend a lot of time, as I say, on the dairy farm and in my father's company when I used to go up on weekends, and with the outdoors as my companion. And I think that had a lot to do with developing my imagination. Although it did come from a creative family. On my father's side were all musicians. In fact, my great uncles were professional musicians of world-class standard. And on my mother's side, her mother was a voice teacher, an elocution teacher, as they put it in those days. And I think that carried through to my mother's sense of culture and her way of speaking. And of course, once we were at NIDA, there was a lot of emphasis on the spoken word. So that was helpful to have that background. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Did your parents encourage you to become an actor, or both of them encourage you, or were they unsure?
Ken, I'd have to say they were very encouraging. It was fairly clear from early on that I was a bit of a performer, and seemed to. I don't mean to be cliche about it, but I was. In my mind, worked with a lot of actors over the decades. There's the actor who's quite reticent and is not not an exhibitionist is too strong a word, who doesn't attract attention to themselves. But doesn't mean they're not a good actor. They're fabulous actors. And the other actors do like to have the limelight. And I suppose I fell into the second category. And a lot of it was pushed that way too, with this kind of bobo image, and everybody at school, particularly the boys, teasing me a lot. So rather than go and hide under a rock through that experience, I kind of showed off. And it was character building. And so, yes, from an early age, went there at drama school. My mother sent me to drama classes and acting school, which wasn't a thing then. Since they put drama in high schools, which happened in the 80s, a lot of acting classes and acting schools have sprung up, and it's become a thing to do. But back in the day, it wasn't such a thing to do. And yes, she encouraged me in the dance classes, acting classes, gym, what we used to call eurythmics, which I don't know whether they actually teach anymore, but it was based on the Leslie Cox method. So yes, very much encouraged. And I went to Flinders University first before NIDA. At the time, I didn't even know about NIDA. I was there in Adelaide, and it wasn't aware of it. And a girlfriend of mine made me aware of it. So after 2 years of doing the drama course at Flinders University, I auditioned for NIDA and got in. So that was just a progression of where I'd started from when I was about 11. I've been doing classes since I was 11. Yeah.
Wow. We do want to get to NIDA in a moment, but
that's all right.
I know you probably don't have a lot of time in your life. You're very busy, but do you have any hobbies you like to do in your spare time?
Oh, if I had the time, I'd be doing a genealogy. I'm an amateur genealogist, Matt. I started when my mother was alive, and she wanted me to look up some relatives, and I did the hard way before Ancestry was a thing, ancestry.com, and it was around, but I didn't want to pay the money for it. And I did, hard-earned searches through ships lists, and discovered a lot about a great set of great-grandparents who are in Melbourne. Actually, I've got 3 sets of great-grandparents buried in Melbourne. So I believe post, since colonialism of Australia, they're helpful in setting up what we now know as Australia. Yes, so, and gardening, both of which gardening's a maintenance issue now that I've planted a new garden, and you just got to get onto it. But they'd be my 2 hobbies.
Oh, fantastic.
And writing. Well, writing's not really a hobby, but I try to make some money from it now.
Yep.
Have you been coping through the pandemic and the lockdowns and so forth? How have you coped with that?
Yes, well, like everybody can, it's been a very challenging time, hasn't it? And I suppose everybody's sick of the words like challenging and unprecedented and everything else that's gone along with COVID, and it's still a very rocky road. we're learning more and more about it. And I think we're just going through a period of time right now, as we are here on the 8th of January, 2022, of kind of stepping back a little bit. And certainly we're getting numbers now that indicate the socialization over the festive period.
Yeah.
We were in a state of flux, having relatively recently moved down from Brisbane to Melbourne, which always reminds me of that line from Flying High, that very funny movie,
Yeah.
where the guy's about to land or something's happening, and there's, it looks like they're going to crash, and this happens and that happens, and he says something like, "I picked the wrong day to give up smoking." Well, I felt like I picked the wrong day to move to Melbourne, the wrong year, but who was to know? Nobody could have foretold what was going to happen. So yeah, in terms of coping, just trying to get on with keep working at your skills base a little bit, and writing, walking the dog, just keeping active and positive. Yeah, wearing masks, and double masking. I'm double masking now when I go out.
It's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah.
Safe out there. Now, I was going to ask you about cooking and your favorite food, but I've decided to change that to ask you about being a Churchill Fellow. Fellow.
Oh, right. Okay. Yes.
Explain
Thank you
to
for
the
asking.
fans what that means for the fans that don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like an odd concept, doesn't it? Churchill Fellow, for a start. It's a fellow. Why isn't it a female? Some sort of or any? Why does it seem to be related to being of a gender? But it's got nothing to do with that. It's well, Churchill, as we all know about Winston Churchill, was a bloke who was around and was instrumental in both World War I and World War II, Prime Minister of England for many years, and he left a sort of an ongoing legacy of encouraging research for people based in the British Empire, for traveling overseas to research their area of expertise, or the area that they're interested in, and to add to the body of knowledge of that subject. And I chose not to research acting, because I think there's a lot out there about acting. But as a playwright, I'm interested in the process of writing. So I applied to develop a paper about how screenwriters and playwrights, or writers, performance writers who work as both playwrights and screenwriters, how their practice in one form impacts on the other. And the other strand to my fellowship was how they teach playwriting in various countries. And so I trekked off in 2018. You have to do your research overseas. I have done some research on this subject here, so it's not to in any way diminish the talents of our locals, but this had to be done overseas. And so my countries that I went to were the USA and Canada and the UK. And in those three countries, I met with a range of writers, a lot of them, people that our people listening might know of, might be people like Hannah Moscovich, who is a Canadian playwright and a screenwriter who's really coming to the fore now. More people that might readily recognize people like David Lindsay-Abaire, who heads up the Juilliard School in New York, but is also a playwright and writer in his own right. Tony Kushner, who wrote the fantastic play Angels in America, and he also recently wrote the screenplay for the Sondheim West Side Story that's on at the moment. Okay. Enda Walsh, who is an Irish playwright and screenwriter. Mike Lee, who people would of course heard of. Christopher Hampton is a stellar playwright and screenwriter, and the list goes on. And I interviewed all these people, and also a bunch of educationists that live in those countries, and then wrote a paper about playwriting and screenwriting, how one impacts on the other, and how we develop our playwrights. Anybody can access that report. If they just type in Sally McKenzie and Churchill Fellowship, they'll find links, and then they just click on the link and you can read it.
Oh wow!
And good luck.
Put a link up on the YouTube video. That's the other thing.
Oh, that'd be great. Yeah, and tell them, anybody that's listening or watching, I should say, there is an executive summary up the top, because the rest of the page, the rest of it's quite a lengthy document, but you can just dip into it, and you can also look at different interviews. And the other thing that you can do is, yeah, you can read things out of order. There's an index there, etc. Yeah, it was a great thing to do. But very quickly about cooking, I do like cooking, and I think that if I were to answer Ken's question, one of the things is I've developed my repertoire of things that I make since COVID struck. So I suppose that's one positive thing. Yeah.
There's been a lot of bread being made over
Indeed. I did develop a couple of things of bread which I haven't taken over to we're still in COVID times, so I suppose we could say non-lockdown times. But it was more things like there's some really nice desserts and chocolate, things like that, and maybe or different types of pies that I found recipes for, etc. And yeah, so that was one way of coping with it. At least you could make food and enjoy it. One of the great enjoyments of life, I think.
That's true.
Hopefully everybody can enjoy it.
Another enjoyment of life, so they tell me, is watching TV shows. Do you have favourites?
No, probably won't like me for this, but I tend to binge watch. I tend not to watch drama on TV at night. I watch the news, etc. There's a lot going on, etc. And then I'll decide to get up at 5 a.m. for maybe 6 weeks and watch some series on Netflix and other subscription channels. Ken, I love historical dramas, so I really enjoyed things like Peaky Blinders. It got a bit silly in some of the eps, but generally speaking, the series was really well done. And of course, The Queen, which I'm sure a lot of viewers enjoyed, but yeah, I really enjoyed and I love things like the one that was set in the chess. What was it called? Yeah. So I tend not to. I don't have favourites in answer to your question. And I think the person that you're with also has to, so it's better that I just go and watch the sort of thing that I like to watch. But in terms of a stylistic that I like art house movies. I'm not a great fan of action movies. I'm not a great fan of episodic TV, which is, I know what we're here to talk about. I like standalones generally, but having said that, though, I just watched a whole bunch of series and it really did hook me in. That was part of something I did during lockdown. So yeah, eclectic in terms of my taste, I would say.
Yeah, fantastic. Now, I did want to ask you about some of the other shows that you've appeared in, but there was one show in particular which I'm going to spring on you, was called Fat Cow Motel. It was a murder mystery show, and you played a character called Eleanor Rigby, which is an interesting name based on the Beatles song that Paul McCartney wrote. Can you tell us much about that show?
Oh, let me think. Well, I think it was a bit of a groundbreaking show in as much it was delivered in different mediums. Interestingly enough, that one of the filmmakers that made it, a producer, Nathan Mayfield, who's gone on to be, who established the company Hoodlum, which has gone on to make a whole bunch of stuff and been very successful. They were the first to recognize that delivery platforms like phones and etc. And that was one of the things about Fat Cow Motel, that it was delivered in different platforms. And also there was a kind of, it was immersive in terms of you could predict the endings, and it was a bit of a whodunit. I didn't experience that myself, so I can't talk about that side of it, but I just remember filming it. It was good fun, and Eleanor Rigby, I don't know why they called her that. Whether it had any great impact with can't remember how it had anything to do with the storyline. Yeah. I just remembered that, she was an interesting character. In terms of my other work, Mortified, some of the watchers, not that some of the viewers are here watching this because they remember Prisoner, so they're probably not going to be the age group that Mortified was targeting, because Mortified was very much targeting 8 to 12-year-olds. But having said that, it has been an incredibly successful show. One of my things that I've done over the years is go into schools and perform one of my plays, and the sort of recognition factor for Mortified Mystic Marge was extraordinary for generations going through because of repeats, etc. And that was fun. It was shot down at Currumbin, which is near the Gold Coast, and I played this kind of crazy aunt. I usually get crazies. I guess it's the hair. They will just assume that you got curly hair, you're crazy. So if you've got straight hair, you play executives. Somebody decided that some time ago. But yeah, she was fun. Mystic Marge. She drove around in a pink moke. She tells fortunes. She was a little bit larger than life, and was the main character. Marnie Kennedy played the main character, who's a fabulous actor and did such a great job. And she was only 12 years old at the time. Wow. And played her aunt, and it was just really good fun. I mean, looking at the other ones, Harrow was relatively recently, and yes, I see Fires is up there. Fires we just shot this last year. Even though we were in lockdown, many of the particularly film industry had COVID safe practices. So you had to go for tests before you actually arrived for your wardrobe fitting and all that sort of thing. And they were very careful. But of course, once you got on set, you had to do it. Obviously, we're acting behind masks, but there was lots of testing going on, etc. And so sadly for a lot of my colleagues, the live theatre gigs were cancelled, but the film industry, the screen industry managed to survive. And so we did Fires last year, and as we know, that was based on the Fires. It was based on a real lived experience, and has done very well and won the AFI for Best Series last year. And all the characters, apart from 2 characters, all the characters were different for the 6 episodes. And Harrow, which you may want to talk about.
Yes. We can bring up Harrow. Please.
Harrow was shot in Brisbane, and was shot on location, and it was a bit of fun. Played a sister in a hospital. I often get my screen roles. I often get authoritative types or eccentrics. Seems to be the kind of palette, which I found quite interesting. But I've done an extraordinary amount of theatre, and theatre allows you to do a range of from A to Z, and that's what's so challenging and exciting about it. Yeah.
Fantastic. Now, we covered Ken's question about Mystic Marge and Mortified. Can we talk about, have you worked with any cast members from Prisoner since that you'd remember? Other shows?
One of the things that probably, and I have to be a little bit careful, but one of the problems that isn't of great value in some respects is living somewhere where they have less of a screen industry. And I based myself out of Brisbane for a number of decades for various reasons. And so opportunities, there are more opportunities now, but the opportunities prior to that weren't as prolific. And so my answer to that is no, I don't think that I have met, except perhaps I came down here to do Flying Doctors while I was living up there. And I don't know whether Robert Grubb was in Prisoner, although he probably wasn't in my episode. Lynn Scott I actually knew from NIDA. She was a year below me, and Robert Grubb was as well. But Robert he sort of was the main doctor in Flying Doctors. Yeah. So my answer to that is no, I don't think so. I don't think that I worked knowingly with anybody from that from those episodes of Prisoner.
Okay.
Speaking of NIDA, can you tell us how hard it is to get in?
Well, I have since gone on to do some teaching for what they call NIDA Open, which is obviously not NIDA. NIDA itself has changed also along the years. Back in the day when we went through, and it was just a very small cohort, they were able to sort of ask you to leave at the end of each year if they didn't think it suited you. It wasn't necessary that you didn't have any talent or etc. So in terms of the statistics of getting in, Ken, they're pretty, you know, this is, I don't think it's changed much, maybe 1 in 100 or something, I don't know. It's very difficult to get in, but of course there's a lot more competition for NIDA now. We've got Whopper over in Western Australia, and we've got VCA here, QUT up in Queensland. So there are other schools, but of course NIDA came along first, so it's still regarded, I suppose, as the benchmark. Still difficult to get in, and particularly more so, as I mentioned before, now we've got drama in high schools. A lot of young people think, well, I'll pursue that. So difficult to get in. They now take more people than they did when we went through. I think they take up to about 30 people in first year now, and they stay through. They don't go through a culling process at the end of each year. They can't now. It's all affiliated with New South Wales University, and you come out with a Bachelor of Dramatic Art. Now, when I came out with a Diploma of Acting, which I was very proud of. But NIDA changed their model, and now you get a Bachelor of Dramatic Art in either acting or design or directing, or I think writing as well. I didn't have to, I upgraded mine by writing a couple of papers. So that's why I've got a Bachelor of Dramatic Art in acting post graduating. So at the time it was very difficult to get in. Our year started with 28 people, and then the next year we were culled down to 15. And even at the end of our second year, there was a possibility of losing some of us, but you know, we said no, that's ridiculous. We want to stick together. We were a very close group. Our particular NIDA cohort, there were 8 men and 7 women, and we were quite a standout year in terms of our graduates. Yeah.
You also directed the acting class of 1977, which included Mel Gibson, Judy Davis, Steve Bisley and Debra Lawrance, who we spoke to in episode 26 of Talking Prisoner. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes. Well, unashamedly, I thought, well, it could be quite a good commercial product is to make a film about, you know, the acting class of 1977, because it did have these stellar graduates. Not at the time, it wasn't like these people were stellar graduates. The industry used them that way, or the industry elevated them to that. At when we went through, we were just all grubby actors in our tights and there at 9 a.m. or if you were a little bit later than 9 a.m. you weren't allowed into class, and it was incredibly rigorous. And what I loved about my training was that A, it was so rigorous, and B, that's all we did. We didn't have any written subjects. We had one subject in first year for an hour on the Wednesday afternoon about history of theatre, and all the rest of the time from 9 to 5:30 every day of the week, and then productions on weekends, we only did things that were associated with acting. Which is not like a university course where you might have over here, you might do, you know, something on product, you might do a voice for an hour, and then tomorrow you might do something else that's associated with acting, but you've got other university subjects that you have to integrate. Well, we weren't like that. It was just, as I say, completely associated with everything to do with acting. And so you really felt that you had earned that diploma of acting when you came out. And years later, when I was a little bit disenchanted with the acting business. I'd been acting for about 2 decades, and I found it rather disempowering. Actors, unless you're sort of huge boss, you know, unless you're a box office actor, you don't really have much say in what you do. You often don't even told about work that you may be being, or that you may have, there was something that stimulated me. The catalyst was a company were meant to ask me about a particular role, and they just didn't get round to it, and the director had asked them and blah blah, and then I didn't find out until closer to when the actual gig was happening. And I had 2 children and I wanted to live a life, and it just occurred to me that actors were the last thing that sort of is part of the jigsaw puzzle that they put together when they make productions, even though they're the thing that hold it all together once it does get up. So I decided I'd like to divert my career into filmmaking. And in order to do that, I thought, well, if I make a documentary, then I might be able to move into feature film, which is what I was trying to do. And I'd had quite a lot of success with developing a feature film with what was then called the Australian Film Commission and my local Pacific Film and Television Commission up in Queensland. So I made this documentary, Acting Class of 1977.com, which was a bit of an unfortunate title because as soon as you write that down, it becomes a link now. So it's since been shortened to Acting Class of 1977. I got some money to do some interviews in Sydney, etc. But they were a bit stagey, the interviews. I mean, the whole thing about documentary is try and capture people at their, when they're kind of off guard. But the keystone to that documentary was an interview with Mel Gibson. I had been trying to get an interview with him, and it was, as you can imagine, it was a bit tricky, but not because we're in different countries, etc. But the NIDA theatre opened, I think, and they moved premises from the old premises in High Street, Kensington, and they moved to their new premises in the Anzac Parade. And the NIDA theatre was being opened, and Mel put quite a bit of money into it, in the $1 million range. And as we were his year, we were asked to come. So we did. And I packed this little mini DV camera and got a kind of a corridor interview with him, which is the best part of the doco. Yeah. So then I've got the interviews of everybody that I could get interviews. A couple of people from the year didn't want to be involved, I thought. But it mainly talks about, really, it's not sort of, oh, wow, a couple of our year got to be big names. It's just about the experience of learning to be an actor and how the industry used us. And to be honest, John Francis, who nobody would have heard of since, who was a great actor during our 3 years, who now lives in Tasmania, he what he has to say is just as valuable as Mel. So, yeah.
Do you think social media's changed all the, people that want to be actors? They don't worry about NIDA and all those things. They think if they've just got 1 million followers, they're just going to be discovered and thrown onto TV, and they're not doing the traditional learning how to act, and that's why it's all changed now.
Well, that might go until you have to actually do it. I mean, we'll talk about it when we wrap up, but I'm working on a play at the moment that I'm involved in. It's just a 2-hander called Betty that's going on in St Kilda. And I mean, the text that I've got to learn in this script here, and not only that, it's culturally foreign to what I'm used to. So I've got to kind of enter a world that I'm not used to. And the physicality of the performer that I'm playing is certainly not my physicality, blah, blah, or the emotions that she's expressing. And then it's not just that, I'll have to repeat that over a number of performances. So, and that's, I know you might be talking about screen acting, but you still have to have the ability and the skills and to be able to cut it and do it. And that's where it all comes unwound, when people might just go, oh, I do that. I mean, yeah. So ultimately, you don't really decide how the industry is going to use you, and therefore you have to be able to adapt and have the skills to be able to approach all aspects and mediums and platforms in the industry if you want to stay in there and make a living.
Definitely. Yeah. Now, speaking of theatre, you have an extensive list of theatre productions you have done. What's one of the highlights from your theatre career?
Yes, well, I'd have to say that it was a play that I did here in Melbourne with the Melbourne Theatre Company. Rightly or wrongly, just to digress a minute, rightly or wrongly, my agent at the time, Bill Shanahan, thought it was better to go and work in Sydney. However, it interrupted a really stellar trajectory here of me working with the Melbourne Theatre Company, and I played some fantastic roles, and the one that put me on the theatrical map was Lavinia, which is the title role in Eugene O'Neill's Morning Becomes Electra. We did, it's a huge role, bigger than Hamlet, and it was directed by Michael Blackmoor, who's an English director who's very well thought of and was fantastic to work with. And we were there. It's set in 1860 in the US, and my character changes from this sort of black spider that's filled, just as a metaphor, filled with angst and bitterness. She blossoms into a woman at the end of it. So it's got a really interesting arc for the character. It's just one of those. It's very dramatic, but it was just one of those things that really kind of, because I'd also done the role up for the Queensland Theatre Company in a different production, and then I auditioned for the one in Melbourne and got it, and so it was just one of those roles that put me out there. But I've also really, really enjoyed doing a lot of Brecht and working with his music. That he's one of collaborators was Kurt Weill, who wrote things like Mac the Knife, which is what most people would know of. But with Fruitney Opera, where I played Jenny Diver, and she does those great roles of like the songs like Jenny, etc. So that has been fantastic. Really enjoying this, which is a play that's going on shortly, and it's a new work by an Australian writer. But I've done the range. I've done the gamut in theatre, which is, it really does put you on your mettle. I always equate it to being like an elite sport, because you can't go out there and fall off the tightrope. It's very obvious. I mean, even one word out of place because your mouth doesn't quite work is enough to kind of jolt people. So it really, it's a very demanding medium if you do it, if you work in a professional context with it. So that may be why some people like some musicals, some people that are in the pop industry or even screen stars, when they try to step over into theatre, maybe don't quite cut it and it doesn't work. Whereas people that have been trained in theatre can make the transition. You mentioned Deb Lawrence. Well, she'd be one of those. She was in my year, as you know, but and Glenda too. I mean, a whole bunch of people that have been trained what we call classically would be able to make those jump between the two. So yeah, I really have enjoyed my work in theatre. It is a very different, even though both the performance, obviously, you're working to your point of delivery in film and TV is your camera. And so you adjust your performance. It doesn't mean that you are not as grounded as you are for one or the other. You still got to have that internalization process. But if you're there on a stage and you might have 1,000 people in the auditorium, obviously, your performance has to carry up to the last person in the very back row. So that's going to put some work. You're going to have to work on your voice and a whole range of other physical things that will make that work. So. Yeah, point of delivery is the way we express it in terms of how you might work for the two different platforms. But yeah, it's great. Stage is, it's people that have done stage, and I would even say that for Mel, he'd probably be there waiting for Godot in a shot if he could. It's like a bug, they talk about the theatre bug. Well, it does get you, because it really does challenge you in lots of ways.
Yeah, it's sorry, a lot of the cast members we've spoken to that have done theatre have said the exact same thing.
And because I guess it's because you are very much on the spotlight. You could be looked at any point in time, whereas in film and TV, I mean, the director may or may not even use the bits that you filmed. But you are more in control of your performance, if you like, once you hit the stage. And that also means being able to give focus to everybody when you're not in the spotlight. But it's a very demanding thing, and this you have a bunch of skills that you need, not in any way that you don't need them for screen. There's certainly, and utilizing time between takes. You may have to extraordinary things that you have to respond to in screen. It's you still need skills for screen as well.
Yeah.
It's just a different point of delivery.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You teach at NIDA Open and are a sessional tutor at QUT. Can you tell us about that and how it came about?
Yes. Well, QUT, I'm not a sessional anymore because, well, I don't live up there anymore. But of the last few years, in terms of the NIDA Open, I possibly won't be doing any of that at the moment just because I'm busy. But I have done a substantial amount of it. And it came about, I suppose, the NIDA Open came about because I think they were, NIDA Open is a strand of NIDA, and they cater for younger people and a range of people actually, and also mature people that really want to develop certain skills, etc., and have the ability to, drama classes. And I think I was approached by NIDA in Sydney. Was I interested in doing some work for them in that area? And of course, being in the entertainment industry, one's usually wanting to do anything that's going to assist with you in terms of your financial outcomes. And I think teaching. I don't think you teach. One of the things that they used to teach us at NIDA was that you can't teach acting, but you can teach a lot of skills and a lot of mechanisms that will support the acting process. And I think that's true. I don't think you can teach acting as such. I think you can't teach imagination. I think imagination is something that is developed and is intuitive and a whole bunch of other things. Also, I think there's a lot about acting that's intuitive and should never be felt that you can't explore because you've got all this other stuff there that's saying you should do it this way. So, but having said that, I've taught a lot of acting skills for NIDA Open and tried to develop imaginations through various games that I've put people through. I tend to work with above 15-year-olds because I believe that younger people need to develop their imaginations, and they shouldn't feel in any way constrained by being sort of taught. But having said that, as I mentioned at the beginning of the interview, I myself was being taught drama, but from the age of 11. But we didn't actually were taught drama when I think about it. If I had to kind of go back then and think about what we did when I was 11 and what they said NIDA, but these students that were attending NIDA Open students might be doing it the year when they were aged 11. And the difference would be that when I was doing it, we just did all practical things. So we might do a soundscape. We might spend a couple of sessions doing a soundscape. We might do a production. And so we were learning through hands-on. So it came about by, being approached and wanting to do, did I want to and share stuff? And I do particularly like working with the senior high school students, because they're of an age where they've got a sense of how they might fit into the industry, or they have a bit of an understanding of the industry. One thing I do notice, though, that a lot of them have just an idea, as I think you mentioned, Matt, this notion of, I can be an actor, but don't really understand what an actor does, or don't even understand the industry. So a lot of the people that I talk to or that I've taught in the past, don't even go in to see any theatre, or even read plays. They just get audition pieces and they think they are standalone. So I always encourage them to please read the play from which the audition piece is, because it's all your given circumstances and the context of the work, and also go see live performance. I know a lot of it's expensive, but they do have cheap nights for students, and it's worth saving up for. Yeah.
That was going to be a question I was going to ask you. What's a piece of advice you would give to an upcoming actor? And I think you've just You just answered it there.
Well, see as much as you can. Well, when we're not in COVID times,
Yeah.
See as much as you can, and that's not just the convenience of your screen. You know, go and see people in live theatre, and read plays. You know, they're very accessible and probably a bit daggy to mention libraries, but if you can't afford stuff, you can always go to a library and borrow it. Because it will give you a sense of drama, what drama is, and not just drama, because there's lots of ways. There's lots of what they call in playwriting terms the form of the piece. You know, whether it's naturalistic or realistic, or whether it's surrealistic, or is it a piece of something like Pinter, where it's just absurd, or is it restoration comedy, or is it a Shakespearean piece? You know, this whole gamut of the form FORM of works that'd be good for students to understand.
Definitely. Now, I want to be courteous of your time because we're sort of halfway through. Should we sort of head to the prisoner, or are you happy to do a couple more questions before?
I'm happy to do a couple more questions.
Yeah. But I did want to talk about all the awards that you have won. We can see on display in the background there.
I don't know about all of them, but I've got a couple. Well, the one that looks like, I suppose it's a figure within I'm not quite sure, but I've had it for some time now. It was 1983. I won, which is the precursor to the Logie. It was what was then called a Penguin Award for Best Actress, Best Single Performance of an Actress in a serial. And it was for a Cop Shop, which was another Crawford production. Oh no, wait, Prisoner wasn't Crawford, was it? It was a Crawford production called Cop Shop, which made a lot of episodes, and it was the 500th episode of Cop Shop, and it was a special two-hour series. So it was a special 2-hour series of Cop Shop. It was directed by Bud Tingwell, the great Charles Bud Tingwell, and it was based on a real story. It was called Rape, and I was the rape victim, and I won that for it. So that was that's what that is. And the one next to it is for another documentary that I made, and it was for the writing of it, and it was awarded by the Australian Writers Guild for Best Public Documentary. Yeah.
Wow, amazing. Speaking of Cop Shop, they actually have a Cop Shop reunion happening this year, the middle of the year, in the Kew Courthouse, where they're having cast members from Cop Shop appear, and fans can do a meet and greet. And well,
that's interesting, because I did something for La Mama Theatre in early December here, because I don't know if you know, but La Mama burnt down and was rebuilt, and this was sort of the opening of it, and to mark that, they had a festival of works, and I was involved in one of those works, and one of the cast members in one of the other plays, his name's just escaped me because I've only just met him, but he was in Cop Shop quite a bit, and he and I were discussing Cop Shop, so he'll probably know all about that.
Judge Enterprises and Events is holding the event. It looks really
right.
Linda Stoner, Paula Duncan, Gil Tucker, they're all going to be there. It's
all right. Was that's right, because I was in this sort of standalone, if you like. I was this but because it was a 2-hour special, which to commemorate the 500th episode.
Wow, amazing.
So I'm probably not on their dial in terms of, it was, of course I remember Paula Duncan well, and Linda Stoner, and all the regulars.
Yeah, great show.
You also appeared in an episode of Harrow as Beverly McIntyre. What was it like working with established Welsh actor Ian Grufford and everyone else you worked with in your episode?
Oh, it was good, thanks, Ken. Ian was a very accommodating and generous performer, I had a few scenes with him. He plays this kind of wide-eyed innocent, if you like. That's, you know, it's a good series, as it came out of Brisbane by Hoodlum. It was an enjoyable process. The director was nice to work with. It was set on location at so a location's often a nicer way to work in TV world, because you know this you can feel a little bit like the world that you're entering, the world of the play or the world of the screen world that you're entering is you're better supported in some respects rather than a flimsy set. But yeah, they're all good people to work with.
Fantastic. Now let's get into one of the greatest. Oh, we've lost Ken.
Oops.
So we have lost Ken, but that's okay. We're still here. So one of the greatest TV shows in history, Prisoner. You're only in 2 episodes, but you're still a very well talked about character in Prisoner. It had a massive impact as Roo Morgan, which was the top dog of Blackmoor prison. So how did you depart for Roo Morgan?
Well, at the time, I was with an agency, Shanahan Management, and I think Roo Morgan came about through this series of work that I was getting through Crawford's, which included that role that I was just telling you about, the role of Gail, I think her name was, in the cop shop that I won the award for. I think I did a couple of other things with Crawford's, and they just approached me to play Roo Morgan. I think at the time, to be honest, Matt, they were looking to wrap up Prisoner. I seem to recall they were looking to stop production.
Yeah.
And I guess they needed a kind of heavy, and they approached me to play Roo Morgan. So I've seen it since, yes.
Yeah.
Because it's out there, I think.
Yeah, no, I mean, the episodes are on YouTube, and you know, especially the Blackmoor era, the fans just love it. Had you watched Prisoner prior to getting on the show?
I guess I must have. Gosh, it was a while ago. But yes, certainly I knew people in it, colleagues, and I'd worked with them before. And I guess it's interesting because it was episode 666, wasn't it? And 667.
Yeah.
So in terms of where it was, I mean, that's a fairly long time to be shooting something, isn't it?
Yeah, very well established.
Yeah, very well established by that stage. And I guess the other thing is that I was living in Sydney at the time. I wasn't a local in Melbourne, and you know, they were more likely to have regulars. It was more financially viable to have people that were living locally. So I do remember being brought over from Sydney to Melbourne to do those 2 episodes. I recall that we shot the exteriors in a convent. I'm pretty sure it was a convent, and the interiors in the studio. I remember vividly doing some improvisation where there was some altercation that was going on, and we were sort of improvising, because I remember being on the floor. I also remember having my eye on the time, because I had committed myself to doing a kind of stand-up at a place like in Melbourne, at a place like Flying Trapeze, or the comedy, probably somewhere like the Flying Trapeze. It was a comedy a venue at that time. And I do remember the fight scene with Glenda, but looking back on it, I think perhaps, if people don't mind me saying, I think we should have rehearsed it a bit better, but it was all done very quickly.
Yeah.
And I think the acting style, watching it now, does reflect the stylistic that was kind of predominating at the time. Wasn't particularly subtle, and neither don't think our fight scene was particularly subtle either, but it's all to do with the context. So
yeah. Did you know when you got the role that it was just going to be the 2 episodes when you first got it?
I would have, because that would have been what the contract asked, and I don't think I didn't audition for it or script or test for it or anything. I just, in those days, often if you were, they just looked at your body of work, and also they would have seen it, so they'd make the offer to you. And so yes, they would have. I think they. Do you know what the last episode number was called?
602. Oh, your last episode or the last?
No, the last episode of the whole series was
692. Yeah.
So it wasn't far off, was it?
Yeah, it's about a year. Yeah.
692, 667. Well, it's getting close there. That's only 20 odd episodes. And they were shot at an incredible rate. I mean, the amount of TV time they shot those in, when they talk about TV time, the amount of, say, was a minute's worth of screen, and then they talk about how much you actually shoot in a day. I think the ratio was pretty high. It was, something Ken would be probably able to tell us more than I know at the moment, but it was at least 3 to 4 minutes of TV time a day. And so they just used to barrel through it. There wasn't a great deal of time to be contemplating your navel. I think these days, because episodic TV was really dominated our screens back then, it is less so now. And then they have series now, and I think they have a bit more time up their sleeves. Well, having just said that, no, we didn't have a great deal of time with the more recent thing I did. So yeah, they often just quickly, they just need to move on. Because it's all time is money, and there's so many crew and involved in television. It's such a collaborative effort, so which is great, because there's a lot of people that get employed.
Now, two names I do want to bring up, because the episodes were directed by Kendall Flanagan and Sean Nash. Did you know Kendall at the time, or Sean, who's gone on to be an amazing writer and TV producer?
I don't know. I don't think so. No, I didn't know them prior to working with them on those. And the thing is with TV, although that didn't happen in Fires, which I did recently, which is the episode that I worked in was directed by the great Anna Kokonos. But back in the day, when you did studio work with TV, the director often just sat in a booth, and you most likely didn't have contact with him or her. You just had contact with the first AD or the second AD in TV, the first or second director, who would communicate to you which shots you were going to do and this and that. It was very rare that you actually saw or communicated with the director. My dog's just walked into the shop. Now that's not always the case. And some directors are a bit more kind of want to get out and sort of fuss around, and not fuss around. They've got a great role to play. They might come and talk to you personally, which is always fantastic. But because you were working at such an incredible speed, in those days, it was often that you didn't have that direct communication with the director, unless, of course, then when you went out on location, you're more likely to see or talk to her or him because you're on location and they weren't away in some little booth watching a monitor. Yeah.
Now, the episode with you and Ray Meagher, who played Governor Craven, I mean, the acting between the both of you was just amazing. You could just tell that Roo was on the payroll with Governor Craven, and he comes over and puts his hand on your shoulders. So you could sort of tell, what that relationship was like. What was it like working with Ray at that time? Filming that?
No, it was great. It was a fantastic experience. I mean, I think that actors, particularly when they come together to do a film on TV, and I know it's just exhorting the, all the good things about working on stage and stuff. But what I really, really admire about screen acting and screen actors is that they come together and they work together with such a short amount of time. Very rarely do you have enough, or if any, a rehearsal. And then they're just flung in, and they have to be in these relationships, pretty much on, and now we're ready for a take and let's do it. And so I really, really admire screen actors for doing that, because they're able to just immediately step into the given circumstances and become those characters. And so Ray was a good example of that. It's great to work with. Yeah.
Have you watched those 2 episodes that you've been in?
I have, but not for a while, admittedly. I did, and it is a bit confronting back in the day. And also, I did follow some. I think what put me off was, they allow comments, and some of the comments were a little bit confronting because I get a bit sensitive about that sort of stuff. Probably because we were criticised so much during my NIDA training. But I have watched them, yes.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned comments. It's the problem now with the internet and keyboard warriors and trolls. I mean, they just write whatever they want, and they probably would never even say it to you in person. Ken and I have even copped some criticism on the comments and things with what we're doing. But I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah, it's just. I mean, that's how it is, and people, I suppose, feel they have the means in order to comment, and it gives them a bit of kudos in their own lives that they feel that they've managed to impose their opinion on other people. So it's probably a little bit about that as well. That's fair enough. I guess it's just the way of the internet, isn't it? The wide world web.
That's true. Now, have you watched the new Wentworth? So the Prisoner remake, which is Foxtel's highest rating dramas. Have you seen that?
I have to admit that I haven't.
No, that's okay. No, we just like to ask every cast member that comes on.
I'm not a great one for sitting down and watching a episodic drama like that. I will sit down. I watched Fires. I mean, admittedly, I had a vested interest. And I love historical dramas, but it's just that it's not. Although, having said that, I really enjoyed watching Orange is the New Black. So I suppose it's just horses for courses.
Yeah.
But my answer to that is no, but for no particular reason. It just happened.
Okay. Do you mind if we could just do some fan questions before we wrap up? Is that
yeah,
okay?
of course.
Fantastic. Yeah, because I mean, we're overwhelmed with questions with your interview coming up. So now the first one is from Janice Robinson, who's actually our background producer who helps us. She said, "I really love the character of Rita and am a huge fan of Glenda Linscott. What was it like for you to film those scenes with Glenda?" And you were just mentioning about the rehearsals for the fight scenes.
Yeah, well, it was great because I think I mentioned somewhere in the interview that Glenda and I were at NIDA. Yeah. She was what they call a year below you, because it's a 3-year course. You might be graduating in that year, and then the students come in first year, and then you've got students coming in second year. So there's some crossover, particularly between the year below you, because they got to work on one of your productions. So in third year, it was mainly about doing kind of putting your skills to the test, or developing your skills also through training, but at the same time, some high profile productions. And the second years, which would have been Glenda at that point, would have worked with us in one of our productions. And so you get to know them sort of in that situation too. And plus Glenda and I had developed a relationship. There's only small cohorts at that time around the High Street, Kensington, in the mid to late 70s. So I already had a good relationship with Glenda, which we developed further on set. And she had been with the production for a long time, obviously. And so she would have developed her way of dealing with the whole shooting process. Somebody that's coming into it is a new girl or new boy or whatever. And as such, it's just a different feel because, once you work on an ongoing role in an ongoing series, there's a kind of rhythm that is developed and a way of stepping into the situation, etc., which would have been she would have been very familiar with it. Yeah. But yeah, it's always good working with Glenda, who now runs the WAPA, which was her role at the Western Australian Academy of Performing Arts. And is a very successful teacher.
Yeah, that's amazing. We heard that as well. Yeah. Jay Shaw said, great actress. It's awesome for someone who only appeared in a few episodes that now she's still remembered and had such a massive impact. It just goes to show what a great actress Sally is. And also Aid Parsley said he would like to ask Sally in those knife scenes, was the knife and weapons real? You remember that?
Well, they would have been real, but they would have been blunt because, you know, you can't really use a rubber thing. It looks a bit silly. And one of our good things that we did during our training at NIDA is that we did do stunts, and we also stunt training, and we also did fencing. For 2 years we did fencing. We didn't do it in third year, but every Monday morning at 9 o'clock, I think it was, we'd be down in the gym doing fencing, which was supposed to also develop your reflexes, etc. We would hopefully on that set have had a fight choreographer, who would have worked out, do this, do that, blah blah. The trouble is, once you start filming that sort of thing, to make it real, you often do step past the choreography, and that can have disastrous effects, as we've relatively recently witnessed in LA. But we weren't using live guns or anything, and those I don't think they would have hurt us had we made a mistake, those knives. I think people like Glenda were a little bit too important to the rest of the series.
There's a lot going on in that scene. I mean, there was fire, there was rifles, there was bashings. It was all that.
Well, something that these viewers might like is a film that I did that you haven't referenced, but it's because it's got different names all over the world, but it was called Redheads. Okay. And a writer-director called Danny Vendramini made it, and there is a fire in that. It's similar, has a similar stylistic to Prisoner in some respects. That's why I mentioned it, maybe that the viewers might enjoy it. But it was called Redheads here in Australia. I think overseas it might have been called something like Desperate Prey. But there was fire involved in that as well, and because often when you're stepping up the stakes in drama, you have to go to the next level. And what's the next level? Suddenly the fire appears, or the machine gun or whatever.
Yeah. Fantastic. Cole Taylor said, it still surprises me to this day Roo wasn't transferred to Wentworth after Blackmoor burnt down like loads of the others were. It would have been good to see Roo with Rita on Rita's territory and having scenes with her in Wentworth with the inmates we all knew. Would Sally have liked to have this happened?
Look, I've got to be pragmatic and say my bank balance probably would have. But on the other side, I think it came down to the fact that I must have had a newborn at that stage.
Yeah.
From our earlier discussion, and I was living in a different state. And to their credit, production companies like to do the right thing, and if you're living in a different state, they'll look after your accommodation, etc. So I would imagine it was a pragmatic decision that Roo did the boogaloo after 2 eps. And had I been a local in Melbourne at the time, she may well have made it to Wentworth. So
there's a lot of conspiracy theories online about Roo, whether she burned to death, she escaped, or
I think she was well and living in Sydney and looking after young.
It's a comment shared by many fans why Roo didn't come over to Wentworth, but also Raymond Kelly mentioned the riot scenes look quite intense. Were they difficult to film?
The riot scenes, it's often the work of the editor that makes things look so great. So as I mentioned, it's a collaborative medium, and even more so when you got post-production and you go and everything gets shot, and then the editor or editors with the director and the producer put it all together and create an intense drama. So even though they may have looked I would say they were probably quite comfortable to film. Nobody was put at risk, and we would have been drinking tea between each, I mean, I'm being a bit facetious, but it's really the editor pushing things through, and also the director encouraging you in certain ways to do this and do that and sort of push yourself, and your fellow actors. So, all comes together hopefully at the end.
It does. Darren Hembro also said, what a brilliant addition to Talking Prisoner, having Sally come on. I'd love to ask that, although her character only lasted a couple of brilliant episodes, what did she find the easiest and hardest scenes to act in? Or was it all just natural for you?
Probably the knife scene, just because with fights, I mean, an actor's always stepping into the situation, and then they are the character in the situation, playing out the situation, or the given circumstances, as they're known in acting teaching world. With something like a fight scene, and the sort of choreography, and knowing that, oh, when I move that arm there, Glenda's going to do that there, so it's not a realistic following through. So that would probably be the most difficult in some respects, I would say. Acting is something that it comes, if you've been around it a long time, it's not such a difficult thing. But having said that, there are certain things that are more difficult to find in yourself than others. Which thinking about some of the emotional states and some of the characters and situations that you can always draw from something. There's going to be something in your life that you can hopefully draw from. So yeah,
definitely. David Harvey, this is just a comment, not a question, said, Sally, one of Australia's finest talents, a quintessentially perfect actor. She's so I'm going to mess that word up, chameleonic in her approach to roles. I absolutely love watching what she's going to come up with next.
Oh, goodness. Thank you, David.
Now, Bry Marshall Yusuf also said, what an amazing actress to take on the part of Roo. I would have loved to have seen Roo in the show longer and taken to Wentworth. My question was to Sally, how did you feel joining a successful TV show for such a small amount of time, playing such a powerful character?
I suppose it's part of the actor's shtick to do something like that, to step into a role, what they call guest roles, actually. They call those guest roles, and you have regulars and you have guest roles, and that was a guest role. So I guess there must have been a bit of anticipation floating about, because it's like a well-oiled machine that you're stepping into, and you've got to look like you've been a spoke in that wheel for some time. And sometimes it goes down to the quality of the catering. No, that was a joke. No, I would have. Oh,
come back. Ken's rejoined. Welcome back, Ken.
Hi, Ken. Nice to see you again.
Welcome back.
Nice to be back.
Well, I was just talking about some of the challenges, I think, of working, stepping into a well-oiled machine of a long-running series as a guest performer. I think that's what we're up to.
Yeah.
And I was just expressing that it has its challenges, but the fact that it's been going so long and it's so well-oiled is in its favor, and you just try to fit in there and do it in such a way that it looks like you've been there for some time and that you're part of that world. Because everybody's always very, you're rushed into very different departments. You've got to go prior to your actual shooting. You've got to go into your wardrobe department. Then you might go over to makeup department, and they talk about the look that you might have. With something like Prisoner, the outfits wasn't the big. We had a fairly, you wouldn't say they were glamorous, and neither was the look. But they'd still have to work out the look for you and what you're going to wear, etc. And so you go through that process. You would be mainly dealing with probably the second AD, for example. depending on how big the crew, etc. is. But yeah, it's always a very enjoyable experience because everybody's there focused on the same, the one thing that they want to come out of, and that's a good quality product.
Yeah. Ken, we got up to the last fan question, which was yours by Joshua. Have you got that there?
The last fan question. We have travelled a fair way in, haven't we? The last one from Joshua, which was, had you built up a backstory for Roo in order to make her who and what she was?
Yes, I would have built up a backstory. The backstory, though, would have come a lot from the script. See, Stanislavski is a guy that's often referenced in terms of acting, in particular the naturalistic approach to acting, and one of the methods that he developed was working out who your character is as what's given from the script. So you go through and write down what's written, what's said about you when you're there, and what's said about you when you're not there, what you say about yourself, to give some indication of the type of character that you are. So I would have done that. That was part of my training, and it's something that I would have taken through. I would have looked at the way that my character spoke, and the way, in terms of the vernacular that they used and the types of speech phrases that they used in terms of deciding where she may have come from, what sort of socio-economic background she may have had. Sometimes you have to make up stuff, so it's not in the script, but just something to inform you about how you might approach your character, so that it becomes a real flesh and blood character that's not just something that's what they call two-dimensional. And how people react to you. In terms of Roo Morgan, there was a certain status that she had amongst her fellow cohort, and what was that based on, and how can I best realize that? So yeah, I would have gone through those sorts of processes with her. I usually keep a lot of stuff, but I haven't got those notes with me now over the decades, but it's the sort of thing I often did used to keep.
Yeah. Actually, Ken, something that we, when you dropped out before, we did want to try and get an answer to, in those later years with Prisoner, how often were they shooting during the week? Like how many, was it 5 days a week at that time in the later years?
You're asking me?
Oh yeah, because Sally and I were just talking about it before, like how often they were shooting. And
it was normally 2 days location and 3 days in the studio.
Okay.
I think what we were specifically talking about, Ken, was, how on TV they talk about how many minutes of TV they shoot in a week or a day. And I was speculating that we shot somewhere between a ratio of 3 to 4 screen minutes in a day. That's what I think that's what we're. Would you have any knowledge about that?
No, I don't know exactly because we shot so much out of context. We would do a lot of scenes in the laundry, for instance, and they could be from various episodes.
Yeah.
So you couldn't really keep track of how many minutes were in particular episode because we were doing 2 or 3 episodes at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's right. So, they call in TV world, they call them blocks, BLOCK. Nothing about cell blocks, but blocks. So they might do a block of, and it's as Ken said, it's all linked with location. So if you're going to use the convent in St Mary's, and there's about 10 exterior, there's 10 scenes there, but they're not in sequence. They might be spread over 3 or 4 episodes. Well, what they'll try to do from an economical point of view is shoot all those scenes in one block, so they don't have to keep going back there. It's it's all tied to economy of money, etc. So that's the other thing that I should have mentioned in terms of having respect for screen actors. They shoot everything out of sequence. In theatre world, you start the story here and you end the story here. And there may, when you perform it, that's what you do. There may be non-linear aspects to that performance because of the story that you're telling and the way it's told. But in screen world, you most always be filming stuff out of context and not in the right linear order. So you might, worst case scenario, if your character was born here and died here, worst case scenario is that they shoot the dying scene first. Hopefully that doesn't happen, but that's just to give you an extreme example.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Is there anything that you'd like to add, Ken, before we wrap up?
I'm just thinking back to the days of shooting the box in the same studio. That was in the early 1970s. And we were pushed so much for time. A lot of times we didn't rehearse the actual scene that we were doing. They were very short scenes, but sometimes take one was rehearsal one.
Wow.
And if it looked okay, we moved on.
Doesn't surprise me, Ken. I was just expressing that when you were gone about the time is money thing, and they just had to move quickly. Then that's what came to the discussion about the ratio of how much one might shoot in a TV day, how much screen time you might shoot in a day of filming. So yes, and understandably, it costs a lot of money to put stuff up on screen, doesn't it? People might think less so now because we have digital cameras at our hands and we can make short films, etc. But it's post-production that's still is most rather expensive exploit. So yeah.
Fantastic. Now I know you shared with us what you're working on before.
Oh yes.
Betty, is there anything else that you're working on that you can share with the fans?
So this is a play. Well, just to talk about Betty momentarily, this is a play called Betty that I'm working on, which will go on at Theatre Works in St Kilda from mid-February this year in 2022. Apart from that, I actually will be working after that on a piece that I'm writing about homeless women over 50 living in Melbourne, and that's going to have a reading in the middle of the year at La Mama.
Oh.
I got some assistance to develop that. I like to work on works that are based in reality, so I'll do a fair bit of research on that. And some of the characters will be fictional, some of them will be based on, most of them will be based on real people.
So will you go and speak to?
Yeah, that's what I've done with a lot of. There's a play called Scattered Lives, which has been on the Victorian curriculum for a number of years. Is a research-based work as well. Go and talk to people and based on research, write up their stories in a dramatic context. And similarly, I suppose, with my documentaries that I've gone and researched. And so this will be with this new work, which is called Way, W-A-Y. And yes, I will seek out in non-COVID confronting times people and talk to them about develop a relationship, gain their trust, and talk to them about how they got there. Unfortunately and sadly, women over 50, mature women, is a growing demographic of homeless people, and they find themselves in situations where they no longer can afford their rent, or they've lost their job, etc., and they take to the streets to live. So it's a subject that probably needs some highlighting, so that we can hopefully do something about it. I was drawn to the subject. I don't know if anybody's heard of Orange Sky, but it's a company that came out of Queensland, and it's a really fantastic initiative by a couple of Queenslanders that realised that the homeless people, of course, doesn't mean that they don't want to do their washing, or they want to be clean. So it's this mobile laundry that they set up, and I did for nothing. I was part of one of their ads that they did, and my interest stemmed from that. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing work. Homeless, I've watched a few of those shows on the ABC, Above the Breadline and all those shows, and you just don't realise how bad things are out of your house and
out of your own little network. Yeah, indeed.
Fantastic. Well, that was an absolute honor to have you come on and speak with us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me, Ken and Matt. I've really enjoyed it. It was great to revisit all those times and talk about the future and to consider this rather privileged position that we all find ourselves in. So
yeah,
thank you for having me.
No, that's all right. Thanks very much for being with us. Much appreciated.
Yeah.
Thank you again. Much appreciate being here.
That was episode 30 of Talking Prisoner. If you could please like and subscribe our Talking Prisoner YouTube channel page, and also like our social media, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. This episode will also be available across all the podcast platforms, including Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google, Apple, and the rest of them, and also on the talkingprisoner.com website.